Alright, so you'd have got the taste of loops in Java, and now in the current chapter we will discuss about for statement. So this is another important statement which we use for loops. So it also has some initialization element, some conditional element, and as well as an iteration, whereas the while and do while just had a condition, and here we have some additional elements, and it's very interesting to work with for loops as well. So let's go ahead with understanding and the for loop in a Java program. Let us explore for statement. This is another traditional loop statement which we use in programming languages like Java. And it comes with a very simple structure where it comes with three elements. The for statement has an initialization part, a condition, and an iteration part. So these are the three elements that would come into picture, and as long as these things are true, the body of the loop gets executed. So this is the basic concept of how the for statement actually works. So let's look at what is initialization. So initialization, as the name itself says, it is a piece of code which is required to be executed for initializing the loop, essentially executed only once when the loop starts. And typically we will use this initialization for setting up the value of certain control variable. One or more variables can be there, generally referred to as a control variable, which is represented by the condition. So which is controlled by the condition, and which is a variable which gives me an information whether I have to continue the loop or I have to exit the loop. So that's a basic concept. And typically we'll also have a counter to control the loop of execution. Whenever we have a loop, it cannot be forever, right? So you also have some condition, and based on that condition, as long as that condition is valid, the loop has to be executing. So that's a simple example. For instance, you want to iterate some elements of an array, right? So if the array is containing 20 elements, so 20 times the loop has to be executed. So that's a basic concept. So where in the initialization, you can give a particular initialization variable which acts like a counter. Then comes the condition, which is a Boolean expression. As long as this Boolean expression is true, the statement within the loop will be executed. Either again, it could be one statement or a block of code which is supported. So the body of the loop will be executed if the condition is true, and the loop will be terminated or comes out if the condition is false. So very straightforward mechanism as part of the condition is concerned. And next comes another important part, which is iteration. So when you are running in a loop, so every time you run the loop or run the code in the loop, it is known as an iteration. So one iteration would be completed, and this is the place where we have an expression which will either increment or decrement the loop control variable. So every for loop will have one control variable, and this executes with each pass and repeats until the condition is false, and generally the condition is evaluated based on the counter variable. So that's a basic concept of how the for statement is implemented. So let us take a look at the for statement and implement this thing. So you can also have some variations where you can create infinite loops, which is very much possible. For example, you could use this. So before understanding this, let us go to a quick demo of understanding the loops. So here again, I have a very simple array of temperature readings I have captured. So you have a float array. Okay, so there are certain values which are basically provided. These are all floats, and then I want to find the maximum temperature. Okay, for this purpose, you can also write a program where you get each and every individual element and compare, but using a loop is a good option, especially when you are working with arrays or some collection of objects. which we will discuss in the later chapter. So there is also a very important chapter called collections in Java. So we'll talk about collections in the later courses and chapters, but for now let us look at array. So array, we know this is nothing but a group of elements which are of the same type. So this is what we are basically bringing in, for which we can create a loop. So I want to evaluate and compute the maximum temperature. So in this case, I want to basically take the maximum temperature, and I'm also doing some analysis. I also want to find the mean temperature or average. Okay. So for this purpose, I want to basically iterate the values of this particular array and then compute both maximum and as well as average. So inside the loop, I basically have the body where we have the logic implemented. So we have defined sum variable, and this is 0 for now, and then we are just adding and we are just creating the sum. It's basically also referred to as an accumulator. So sum is like an accumulator where every time in the loop it is getting the value from the array and it is capturing that into sum. So this is what is the first logic. The second logic is I have defined a maximum temperature as the minimum value of float, which essentially is like the minimum 0, and then you want to basically go ahead and compare whether this value is greater than the minimum or the max temperature variable. If it is greater, which will be true in the first iteration itself, then the max temperature becomes like 20.3, and you continue. In the next iteration, what we'll get is the second element. So now comes the question of initialization. So I have a variable defined as I. So I, j, k, these are all the typical variables we use in loop, especially for loop, and then we are initializing it to 0, and then we are saying I less than temperature readings dot length. So what is this length? Length of this particular array gives me how many times I have to execute, because each time I am getting one element of the array. All right. So with this, I am getting this data and I am comparing with the temperature readings of I, which is nothing but of 0, of 1, of 2, of 3. So for this purpose, I am also using the incrementing element where I am incrementing the counter variable. Okay. So this is the way in which we can implement the for loop, and then once all the elements are iterated, it basically identifies this logic condition, and if the length is greater than, if I is greater than the length, it will exit the loop, which is the basic condition we have created, and now based on this it comes out. So which means it iterates and the entire array of elements. It can be even bigger. We have taken a sample array for the sake of this demonstration, and then it records the maximum temperature, so that is what is displayed, and to find the mean temperature, so we have to find the average. So average is being computed, and then we are giving the average temperature recorded. So this is a very simple example of how you can basically go ahead and implement a for loop for reading the elements of an array in a loop and computing some logic with those values. All right, so this is the output. So you could see as expected 22.29, which essentially is nothing but 22.3, which is the maximum temperature which is basically recorded, and then the average temperature recorded is so and so. So it basically gives this as an output. So this is the way where we can use the for statement for creating loop based program. So now let us come back to the mind map. So we do have an option to create certain variations. So if you want an infinite loop, typically we recommend we can use a while loop. So where you can use the while statement. Alternatively, you could also use the for statement with only 2 semicolons, where you are not having any initialization block, no condition, and no iteration also. This is a simple example of creating an infinite loop. And similar to while statement, you also have an option where you can use this particular option where for there is no initialization, only a condition is there. So the condition gets executed. If the condition is executed, the body or it's true, the body of the loop will be executed. And within the body of the loop, you should basically manage the iteration, just like while statement. Typically, we can use while statement itself. In case you don't want to use while statement, this is an alternate mechanism which we can basically use. So this is about the for statement, which is typically used and most commonly used in programming. And we do have an alternate to this for statement which does not even require the initialization and iteration variable, etc., because that is kind of a redundant logic that we have in every program. And this was something which was introduced in Java, which is also referred to as enhanced for loop, or in other words, it is also known as for each loop, which we will discuss in the next chapter. Stay tuned.